in, join the podcast, join the whole stream. Hope everybody is doing well today. Temperatures are really starting to warm up. I believe it's pretty hot for some people. All right, now let's get back down to business. Now, in these times, you would be thinking that, well, during the pandemic, during the shutdowns, during the fact that more and more folks are having fewer discretionary spending, you would believe that many of these casinos would have learned their lessons and they would have thrown down on the nickel and diming. Now, in addition to many other new fees that I've just found out regarding beverages and energy use, correct me if I'm wrong, MGM Resorts, along with the Caesars Eldorado properties, have decided to bring back paid parking. It's just absolutely absurd in these times, considering the fact that you have not enough visitors like you used to. The conventions are not coming back. The quality of service, a lot of people argue, has essentially deteriorated. And not to mention that you don't have the kind of spending, I believe, that you did about 2 years ago. Now, you might argue, okay, people are getting checks, stimuluses, and all that. But nevertheless, the question is, are people spending the same amount per capita than they did 2 years ago? And if the spending dries up, because a lot of people tell me, well, they can't go on like this forever, that it's going to take years to recover from this pandemic, not to mention we have a real estate bubble that, for all we know, if mortgage rates go up, it's likely to burst, not to mention the forbearance is going to end very, very soon. Are these hotels really going to learn their lessons? And basically what they're doing is they're shooting themselves in the foot. Because I don't think in these tough times, and even if they have more money, I don't really think they want to be nickel and dime. But the issue here isn't just the casinos. It's the fact that, number one, we have refused to enforce our antitrust laws, which we should have had. And this just to show you that really the Democrats and Republicans aren't really the party of the working class. The Democrats should be against large corporations. They should be preventing these mergers and acquisitions from taking place. But also, it's the very naive customer base. And that's what we're really seeing here. The naive individuals realize that, well, I guess they don't really care. They can just pay the price, and they just don't really look at their pocketbook. Now, you might as well argue, okay, back in the day, the mob was different, or in the 90s, things were different. Yeah, that's because they were trying to develop those properties massively to lure people in. But now when the area has got pretty established, I guess you can compare to, looking at New York, Chicago, all these areas over time, they realize if they nickel and dime, there's really no consequences. And it's in addition to the service has gone downhill, the front counter, security, harassing people. I can share you my stories about what happened to me later in a future video. And it's just absolutely disgusting what's happening. But so a lot of people tell me the reason they're doing this is because they've lost so much revenue, which, by the way, it's their fault. They're the ones who've engaged the shutdowns. They're the ones who disproportionately gave money to folks who authorized the shutdowns, particularly Steve Sisolak. And by the way, speaking of the shutdown, we know that his casino buddies like Murren heavily profited from the pandemic. There's just no question about it. And as a result, well, in order to make up for the lost revenue, they raised their prices. Now, I've heard in some cases Caesars has actually raised their prices of their buffet. It's just absolutely ridiculous. You still could find many similar buffets for much, much lower prices and not being nickel and dime. It's essentially a sense of prestige. As a local, I would probably go there once every year now. Think about it. It's just really getting out of control. Speaking of visitations, and oh, by the way, I also forgot that, when these times get really, really hard, they're going to be very, very embarrassed. Perhaps they're going to shoot themselves in the foot, and who knows? We could be following in a very similar parallel to Atlantic City, Reno, and perhaps Laughlin. Now, I've heard California and many other states are legalizing sports gambling. What's going on here? Speaking of visitation, Assemblywoman Nguyen Now, although she has introduced some bills that I like, she introduced a bill, even though that we have city and county ordinances, to limit Airbnb properties. So essentially what that means is that you cannot have the property within like 500 feet of a casino establishment. And as we know, the Resorts Association, the Culinary Union, which, by the way, we know it's a tool of the casinos. I've explained that a gazillion number of times. They lobbied to push this bill forward. And I have obviously testified it against. I even mentioned that how Airbnb is not only good for visitation, but it's also good for people who may want an alternative to renting. You might find property as low as $20 a night, and you realize it's probably better than renting. Not to mention the fact that people can actually do this in the black market. They could just go on Craigslist and they can literally have the property and nobody really know what's going on. Now, of course, there's a lot of safety issues with that, but the better thing to handle this situation is to have ordinances. If there are party houses, you find them. You don't need to have all these limitations. Or maybe you can have certain zones in parts of town that are allowed for that kind of development. This is a very limited size approach, as we can see right here. Basically what they're doing is they are obviously trying to limit our competition. They make a 3-night minimum, and even libertarians spoke out against it on behalf of progressives that believe this is corporate fascism. And they also argued for conservatives, saying that this is private property rights. But this is what I've been telling you all along. Nevada isn't really being embraced by progressivism or libertarianism necessarily. It's becoming more and more corporate fascist. Essentially, the casinos are in bed with the labor unions and Wall Street, the financial sector, that are running our government and heavily control both parties. And speaking of all that, believe it or not, that taxes, believe it or not, are going up. Now, not necessarily for sales taxes or property taxes. A lot of those bills got shut down. But nevertheless, mining taxes are going to go up. Now, yes, you might argue that mines are not paying their fair share. But here's a really sad kicker of all this. If they really wanted fairness, they could have raised gaming taxes. But they're not, obviously. And this just to show you that Nevada is not a true progressive state. The taxes are very regressive. And I think a better thing that they could have done is raise gaming taxes and lower sales taxes. Now, it's funny because I see a lot of Jacob's Life in Vegas video. He's been pretty much depressed. He sounds like he's going to throw a tantrum or something about the sales tax increase. And I've talked about this for many, many years. A similar parallel of what's been going on in California. They raise taxes, they never bring them down. That's just how it works. But the real problem with Jacob's Life in Vegas is, number one, he didn't research years ago about how dirty the political system is. And number two, he didn't do a lot to fight it. He didn't even testify against it like I did back in the day. That's what really the problem is. But not only the Clark County extended the sales tax increase of 8.375, and a lot of money didn't go to schools. And by the way, they're saying, oh, it's for the children, because you know who's in these public schools. Disproportionately illegals that are in them. And as you know, white children are probably only like, 24% of the student body. And by the way, if I was a child and I went to that school, I would be part of that 24% because I am technically Caucasoid, even though I am Iranian descent. But despite the fact that whites pay 60% or more of the taxes into the system. Now, that's really the justice that we need to be talking about. But anyway, there are more rumors that they are planning to actually raise the sales tax again. So as you know, they pump the shutdowns. They know the conventions are not giving a lot of money. And more importantly, they probably embrace that the real estate bubble is going to burst, which is disproportionately going to affect our economy. And last but not least, the stadium is running out of money. They're not getting any room tax revenue. They used a rainy day fund to pump the stadium. And they're going to do more and more again. And I did videos about this 5 years ago. See, it all comes down to this. The main problem is that the people of Las Vegas, they don't fight back. They don't push hard enough. They're gullible. They're passive. If we have the balls to fight back, then things would really, really change. Now, unfortunately, the fact is that there are ways that I could fight back. Social media is not getting easy. I've talked about this before. I could put signs. I could do a lot of different things. I can certainly put banners, ads, number of different ways. Now, responding to a comment just said, oh, well, it's SoCal, it's game over. Look, give me a break. California voted against changing Proposition 13. Illinois voted against an income tax increase for the wealthiest residents. So just to let you know that tax increases are not necessarily something that blue states love to do no matter what. We know that Nevadans are not a fan of tax increases at a much higher rate. That's why a lot of us moved here. That's the main prime attraction. And if you get rid of that, then what's really the number one attraction of living in Nevada? What is it, just a dumping ground for California? I mean, that's all it is. It's just a lot of blacks and immigrants, minorities. They couldn't make it in the state, and they decided to move away. Do you think the state would have been as diverse if it weren't for the casino and construction hiring preferences, not to mention the high cost of living of California? But I believe there is hope. Number one, they'll raise taxes. People won't fight back. The economy collapses. We restructure it again. They'll learn their lessons, for heaven's sakes. Or people rise up and they fight back. That's just how it's going to happen. Now, speaking of the whole California effect, I want to make this very, very clear that it's not that California visitors or obviously residents moving in that are really changing our state. I haven't seen any hardcore evidence on that. But what's happening is when Californians move here, it gives the incentives of these politicians to do that. Because think of it this way. If Nevada didn't have population increase, then this would bring a red alert to these politicians, and they would say, oh, we're losing residents. We have to encourage and changing our stance. Why do you think states like South Dakota, Kentucky, they don't have all these very high taxes? Even probably is comparable to many other states. Because if they know they raise them, there's going to be dire, dire consequences. But of course, their political machine is different. They have a lot of more strengths in the rural areas. That's another problem with Nevada, is that almost all of the people live in urban areas. There's a low religious participation rate. So there's basically a lack of balance that's going on. Now think about it. If it weren't for the rurals, it probably would have been a lot worse in terms of the bills that just got passed. So you need to do what you can to keep fighting hard and doing what you can. Now people think, oh, it's game over, it's not going to happen. Well, let me ask you this. Remember the Red Rock development? People massively organized, they fought against it, and what's happening? It's not coming through. In fact, Senator Cortez Masto expands the conservation area to make sure that the Red Rock development doesn't get built. That's what I saw according to the map. Now, of course, they're expanding the areas that can be built for housing development. That's good news for me, who wants to build those real estate development projects. But nevertheless, people fought back. That's what's really, really the problem. Now, speaking of the immigration, I just read on the comment, well, it's up to us. We can fight back. We can put banners. We can demand e-verify. We can audit employers. We can certainly do a lot of things like that. As a matter of fact, technology is getting in the way of employment. We have to make sure that they don't get any increased subsidies and benefits. That's what's really, really the thing. And we know that the real estate market is overheated. It's only a matter of time where if the rates go up, the market's going to implode. Remember, it's the mortgage rates that really makes the difference. And we know who's buying these properties. It's mostly wealthy people, institutions. They're renting them out. We know how this works. And there's only a handful of them. As you know, the trend from the inner areas to the outer areas can't go on forever either, because there's only a handful of them that exist as well. And by the way, if I was a California guy who was able to work at home, I don't know why I would have moved to Nevada. I'd probably move to some area that has a home price of less than $200,000, median-wise. But other than that, it's going to implode if the rates go up, and it's going to really cause a nightmarish effect for a lot of their plans. And we have the opportunity to use this crisis as an opportunity to strike up. That's the way it goes. And this all goes to the pandemic issue, ladies and gentlemen. It's all being exposed. People are waking up. They're exposing the lies of Fauci, the masks, the shutdowns. Remember, it's not just tension heating up for Newsom and Gretchen Whitmer. Eventually, it's going to hit Sisolak. Eventually, it's going to hit all these politicians. Eventually, it's going to hit even assembly members. Like that guy, I can't remember. What's his name? He is the assembly leader of the Democratic Party. I can't remember. Jason Frierson, who blocked me on Facebook, by the way. He not only introduced for the mail-in votings, where I got like 3 ballots, but they have now, I believe, made it permanent. But if this election fraud and all the audits come over and we see what's going on, well, these laws are going to be struck null and void because there was cheating going on. And if we continue this, well, what makes you think it's not going to happen? Because I know for sure there's going to be an audit in Nevada. And not just for the president, but for many other races, including the state senator race, for April Becker, the county commissioner race, for, what's his name, Stavros Anthony. They all know this. I'm telling you. And if this is exposed, because remember, Stavros and April Becker, they were ahead like a day after election day. There probably may be another election. Rumors I heard the military may do and conduct another election. We have a military for a reason. Let's put it to good use. And these shutdowns are going to start exposing the non-governmental organizations like Culinary. And it's also going to expose Jim Murren, who advocated for the shutdowns, who left a month before the shutdown and became part of the COVID task force and now heavily profited from the shutdown. And rumors have it, I heard he fled to Costa Rica. This is how scumbag these people are, but it's up to people like me who will eventually save up, cash out their investments, because I can see a correction in the stock market pretty soon if the fiscal flows, if the unemployment, all these benefits stop flowing. And I will use this to promote not only my ideas, but expose all the corruption happening in the Las Vegas Valley. Because it's really up to you. This will create a huge domino effect. Not just the top deep state players. I'm talking all across the board. Now, make no mistake. You know, there were things that I wasn't a fan of the previous president, a number of issues.